So in the last lecture, I showed you how you can use one state instead of multiple states, and I did talk about it there. Now, the way I'm updating my state here is not entirely correct though. It technically would work, but in niche cases it could fail, and it's simply not a good practice to update it like this. So what's the problem here? Here, I'm depending on my previous state for updating the state. In this case, we depend on the previous state because we use this one state instead of three states approach, and we need to copy in the other values so that we don't lose them. Hence, we depend on the previous state snapshot to copy in the existing values and then just overwrite one value with a new one. Now, whenever, and that's another key rule which you should memorize, whenever you update state, and you depend on the previous state. So for example, as we do here in this object, but also if you would be managing a counter which you increment by 1, for example, whenever you update your state and you depend on the previous state, you should not do it like this, but you should use an alternative form of this state updating function. Instead of calling it like this, you should call it and pass in a function to that function. So you call the setUserInput function and you pass a function to it. For example, such an anonymous arrow function. And this function, which you pass to setUserInput here, will automatically be executed by React, and it will receive the previous state snapshot for that state for which you're calling the updating function. So in this case, for this object state here. So we'll get the previous state snapshot, and now here we should return the new state snapshot. So instead of this function which we pass to the state updating function, we return the new state now. And that now could be, or in this case should be, our object, where I copy in the key value pairs from the previous state with the spread operator, but where we then also override, in this case here, entered title with event target.value. Now, why should we do it like this instead of like this? In many cases, both will work fine, but keep in mind that I mentioned that React schedules state updates. It doesn't perform them instantly. And therefore, theoretically, if you schedule a lot of state updates at the same time, you could be depending on an outdated or incorrect state snapshot if you use this approach. If you use this approach, React will guarantee that the state snapshot it gives you here in this inner function will always be the latest state snapshot, keeping all scheduled state updates in mind. So this is the safer way to ensure that you always operate on the latest state snapshot. So you should use this function syntax here whenever your state update depends on the previous state. That is something you should memorize. If your state update depends on the previous state, use this function form. With all of that though, I wanted to show this because these are key concepts, which you're also going to see again and again throughout the discourse and throughout a lot of React projects. But here, I will actually comment out all of these alternatives, and I will switch back to that multiple states approach instead, which we initially had. So let's comment out all of that and go back to this initial approach. I just wanted to show the alternative because it is a valid alternative. You will see it in many projects. You will have scenarios where you need it. And this thing regarding the if you depend on the previous state, use this approach thing here, that's something you should keep in mind in general, because you will often depend on a previous state, not just if you merged state like this, but also in other scenarios like the counter, which I mentioned, for example. So that's why I mentioned this. Nonetheless, let's go back to this multi-state approach now.